I didn't plan on trusting a stranger with 600 miles of open road. That was the part one kept replaying as I stood in the gas station parking lot at 6 in the morning, coffee burning my hand, duffel bag at my feet, wondering if this was reckless or just overdue. Theo's car, a dark blue Subaru with a cracked windshield, was idling a few spots away. He was inside paying, back turned to me, shoulders relaxed, like this was just another Tuesday. We'd met online. Not a dating app exactly. More like one of those forums where people post half-formed thoughts at 2 a.m. and hope someone else understands them. He commented on something I wrote about feeling stuck. I replied. Then we kept replying. Messages turned into voice notes into late-night calls. Somewhere along the way, he joked about driving west to see if the air feels different out there. I said, half kidding, this newer Nasir, Siri Amora. Siri. He didn't laugh. When he walked back to the car, he smiled like he already knew I hadn't backed out. You ready? He asked, like we were old friends heading to a wedding instead of two guys who'd never shared the same physical space. Yeah, I said. My voice surprised me by not shaking. The first hour was awkward in a quiet way. No forced conversation, just the hum of tires and a low indie playlist he apologized for, even though I liked it. The sun came up slowly, washing the road in pale orange. Theo drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gearshift, fingers tapping to the music. At some point, our knees brushed. Neither of us moved. It wasn't sexual. Not exactly. But my body reacted anyway, alert, aware. I noticed the warmth of him, the way his presence filled the small space. He glanced over, just briefly, and there was something unguarded in his expression. Like he was checking in without words. We stopped for breakfast at a roadside diner with cracked vinyl booths and a waitress who called us Han. Sitting across from him felt different than seeing his face on my phone, more real. His eyes were lighter than I expected. Green, maybe, or hazel. They softened when he listened. So, he said, stirring his coffee, what are you hoping this trip is? The question landed heavier than it should have. I don't know, I admitted. I just know I couldn't stay where I was. He nodded slowly. Yeah. That makes sense. No judgment. No fixing. Just space. Back on the road, the silence felt earned. Comfortable. We talked about small things. Music we outgrew. Cities we almost moved to. People we didn't know how to let go of. Somewhere between exits, I realized how close we were sitting now. Shoulder to shoulder. The car felt warmer. Or maybe that was just me. Hours later, as the landscape flattened and the sky widened, a strange calm settled in. The kind you get when you've already made the choice, and there's no going back to reconsider it. I watched the road stretch endlessly ahead and felt something loosen in my chest. Whatever this trip was going to be, whatever we were, it had already started changing me. And for the first time in a long while, that didn't scare me. By late afternoon, the road started to feel like its own contained world. Gas stations blurred together. Fields gave way to low hills. Theo rolled the window down, letting cold air flood in, and the sudden rush made me laugh. Too much? He asked. No, I said. Feels grounding. He nodded like he understood exactly what I meant. We stopped at a rest area overlooking a river just before sunset. Nothing special. Picnic tables, a couple of tired vending machines, but the sky was streaked pink and gold, and the water below moved slow and steady like it had nowhere else to be. We leaned against the railing side by side, not touching, but close enough that I was aware of the space between us. The quiet stretched, but it didn't feel awkward. It felt intentional. You ever do something, Theo said finally, and only later realize you were lonely before it? I thought about that for a second. About my apartment, my routines, the way I'd filled time instead of living in it. Yeah, I said. I think I'm realizing it now. He let out a small breath, almost a laugh. Same. Back in the car, night settled in fast. The conversation shifted. Lighter, easier. We argued about whether comfort movies were supposed to be bad or just familiar. He admitted he still texted his ex sometimes for the dog updates. I told him I stayed friends with people longer than I should because I didn't like endings. That tracks, he said gently. Somewhere past midnight, we checked into a cheap roadside motel. 1 room, 2 beds. Neither of us commented on it, but the awareness hummed between us as soon as the door closed. Theo kicked off his shoes and stretched, shirt lifting just enough to expose skin. I looked away too fast and then laughed at myself for it. He noticed. "Hey," he said, softer now, "we can take this at whatever pace you want. Or not at all." The relief in my chest surprised me. "Thanks," I said. "I don't feel rushed, just present." He smiled at that, a real one. We sat on opposite beds, talking quietly, about nothing and everything. The road ahead, the places we might stop, the parts of ourselves we didn't usually lead with. At some point, the room went quiet except for the hum of the heater. Lying there in the dark, I listened to his breathing from across the room. The distance felt deliberate, respectful, and yet I was more aware of him than I'd been of anyone in a long time. I realized then that this trip wasn't about escape. It was about honesty, being seen without performance, without labels. Whatever happened next would grow from that. And as sleep finally pulled me under, I felt something steady take root. Not certainty, not answers, just trust. Morning came in thin and gray through the motel curtains. I woke up disoriented for a second, reaching for a routine that wasn't there. Then I remembered where I was, who I was with. Theo was already awake. Sitting on the edge of his bed, elbows on knees, scrolling his phone without really looking at it. When he noticed me stirring, he glanced over and smiled, quiet and unassuming. "Sleep okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, "better than I usually do." That seemed to mean something to him. He nodded once, like he'd file it away. We brushed our teeth side by side in the cramped bathroom, bumping elbows, laughing under our breath about how ridiculous we must look. It felt intimate in a way that had nothing to do with bodies. Just proximity, shared space, no armor. On the road again, the world looked sharper, colors more defined. Theo handed me the aux cord like it was a small gesture, but also a kind of trust. I put on a playlist I hadn't shared with anyone before, songs I listened to when I didn't want to explain myself. He didn't comment, just listened. A couple hours in, he pulled off onto a scenic overlook. Windy, empty, the kind of place you don't plan for, but end up remembering. We stood near the edge, jackets zipped, looking out over a valley that stretched farther than seemed reasonable. "I don't usually do this," he said suddenly. "Road trips with internet strangers?" I teased. He smiled but shook his head. "Let people see me this early, before I figured out how to be what they expect." That landed deep. What do they usually expect? He took a long breath. Someone steadier. Someone who knows where he's going. I'm good at looking like that. I thought about the version of myself I'd perfected. Calm, easy, low maintenance. The one that never asked for too much. "Yeah," I said, "me too." The wind pushed against us, and without thinking he stepped a little closer. Not touching, just aligned, facing the same direction. "I'm tired of pretending I'm not scared," he said quietly. I swallowed. "I'm tired of pretending I don't want more." He turned then, really looked at me. No joke ready, no deflection, just presence. "More of what?" he asked. I met his eyes. "Connection, honesty, this." I gestured vaguely between us. "Whatever this is." He didn't answer right away, just nodded slowly, like he was letting himself believe it too. Back in the car, the air felt charged but calm, like something had shifted without breaking. His hand rested on the center console, palm up. An invitation, not a demand. After a mile or two, I placed my hand in his. It fit easily, no rush, no tightening grip. just warmth and steadiness. We didn't look at each other, didn't need to. The rest of the drive passed in a soft blur. Conversation came and went. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we just existed side by side, hands still linked, the road unspooling ahead of us. As the sun dipped low again, I felt something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not anxiety, not anticipation, alignment. For once, I wasn't wondering how this would end. I was just here, in it, letting the closeness speak for itself. And that felt like enough. The first night we crossed into the mountains, the air changed. Cooler, thinner, like it demanded a little more honesty just to breathe. Theo suggested we stop earlier than planned. "There's a town up ahead," he said, glancing at the map. "Nothing fancy, but it looks quiet." Quiet sounded perfect. The cabin we rented sat a little off the road, surrounded by pine trees that creaked softly in the wind. One bedroom. One bed. This time, neither of us pretended not to notice. Inside, the place smelled faintly of wood and dust, like it hadn't seen many people lately. Theo set our bags down and looked at me, not hesitant, but careful. "We don't have to," he started. "I know," I said, "but I want to be here, with you." Something in his shoulders eased. He smiled, slow and warm. "Me too." We cooked pasta together, bumping hips, sharing space without thinking. It felt domestic in a way that surprised me, like practice for a life neither of us had named yet. After dinner, we sat on the couch with the lights low, a blanket pulled loosely around us. At some point, I leaned into him, just enough to feel his arms settle around my back. The contact sent a quiet ripple through me. Not heat, not urgency, just closeness. "You okay?" he murmured. "Yeah," I said honestly. "I feel safe." He exhaled slowly. "I don't get that a lot." I turned to look at him. "You give it, though." That caught him off guard. I could see it in the way his throat moved, the way his gaze softened. He leaned in first, slow, giving me time to pull away. I didn't. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative, more question than answer. His lips were warm, steady, like he was grounding himself through me. I felt it everywhere, in my chest, my hands, the quiet ache of wanting without needing to rush. When we pulled back, we rested our foreheads together. "Thank you for not making this feel like a performance," he said quietly. I smiled. "Thank you for not asking me to be anything other than what I am." Later, we lay in bed fully clothed, the space between us gone but not erased. His hand rested on my chest, rising and falling with my breath. I traced idle patterns on his arm, memorizing the shape of him. In the dark, I admitted things I usually kept buried. How I'd learned to minimize myself. How I was afraid that wanting more made me difficult. He listened without interrupting, thumb brushing small circles against my ribs. "I don't think you're too much," he said. "I think you're just finally letting yourself be seen." That stayed with me. We didn't rush into anything else. Sleep came slowly, naturally, wrapped around shared warmth and quiet trust. And as I drifted off, I realized something important. Physical closeness hadn't forced emotional honesty. It had touched and made room for it. And in that space, between breath and heartbeat, between who I was and who I was becoming, I felt changed, not undone, not overwhelmed. Just more myself than I'd been in a long time. The next morning, the cabin felt different. Not awkward, not heavier, just aware. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, cutting pale lines across the bed. I woke up first, disoriented for a moment by the warmth beside me. Theo was still asleep, turned slightly toward me, one arm bent above his head. His face looked softer like this, unguarded in a way I hadn't seen before. I stayed still, afraid movement might break whatever calm had settled between us. Eventually, he stirred, blinked, took a slow breath. When his eyes met mine, there was no confusion, just a quiet smile that felt earned. "Hey," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Hey." We didn't rush out of bed. There was nowhere to be. We talked lazily about nothing. How cold it got overnight. How his shoulder ached from driving. At one point, he reached out without thinking, fingers brushing mine. This time, there was no hesitation. We let the contact linger. After coffee and toast eaten off mismatched plates, we packed up in an easy rhythm. No tension about what the night had meant. No pressure to define it. That felt intentional too. Back on the road, the mountains slowly gave way to open land again. The scenery changed, but the closeness didn't fade. If anything, it deepened. Conversation drifted toward things we usually avoided. Family expectations. Past relationships that left marks instead of lessons. "I'm bad at endings," Theo admitted, eyes fixed on the road. "So sometimes I stay in things long after they stop being right." I felt that in my chest. "I leave too early," I said. "The second I think I might be too much." He glanced at me then, expression thoughtful. Maybe we're both just afraid of the same thing from different directions. That sat between us for miles. We stopped at a small town for lunch, wandered through a quiet main street, shoulders brushing as we walked. No one there knew us. There was freedom in that anonymity. We were just two guys passing through, choosing each other for the moment we had. Later, as the sun dipped again, he reached for my hand while driving. This time, he squeezed gently, like reassurance instead of discovery. That night, we checked into another motel, cleaner than the first, still forgettable. One bed, no comment needed. We lay together fully clothed again, the room dark except for passing headlights. I rested my head against his shoulder, listening to his heartbeat. It was steady, present. "I don't know what happens after this trip," he said quietly. "I don't either," I admitted. He turned slightly, pressing his forehead to mine. "But I'm glad it's happening." "So am I." We stayed like that for a long time, neither of us trying to pull more from the moment than it could give. I felt something settle inside me. Not certainty, not promises, just the understanding that whatever came next, I'd shown up honestly, and for once, that felt like enough to carry forward. By the fourth day, the road had taught us its rhythm. Wake, coffee, drive, talk, pause, repeat. Somewhere between a stretch of desert and a long climb back into green, Theo started humming along to the radio without realizing it. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. The way his jaw loosened, the way his shoulders didn't seem so braced anymore. It hit me then, how much effort it takes to hold yourself together when you think you're alone. We pulled over near a lookout just before noon. No sign, no crowd. Just a wide, open drop in wind that felt earned. I leaned on the hood of the car while he stood beside me, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the horizon like he was checking something off an internal list. "I keep thinking about what you said," he admitted. "About leaving early." I nodded. "I keep thinking about you staying too long." He smiled faintly. "Figures." We sat on the ground with our backs against the car, sharing a protein bar neither of us really wanted. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like rest. "I don't want this to be something we only know how to be on the road," he said finally. "I don't want it to disappear when real life shows up." My chest tightened, not with fear, but recognition. "Me neither," I said, "but I also don't want to rush it into a shape it can't hold yet." He turned to me then, studying my face. "You're good at naming things." "I've had a lot of practice," I said. "I just didn't always do anything about it." He reached out, thumb brushing my knuckle once, grounding. "You are now." That afternoon, the miles felt quieter, not less meaningful, just settled. We didn't hold hands the whole time. We didn't need to. The closeness had moved somewhere deeper, like it had learned to stand on its own. As the sun dropped, the road narrowed and curved toward the coast. I smelled salt before I saw the water. Theo slowed without me asking, like he wanted to savor the approach. We parked near the beach and walked until the sand cooled under our shoes. The ocean was loud and steady, unapologetic. We stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching the horizon dissolve into darker blues. I'm scared, he said quietly. Me too. He glanced at me. But I'm not pulling away. I shook my head. I am not either. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. We let the sound of the water do what it's always done. Remind us that some things move forward without asking permission. As night settled in, I felt the shape of what was coming, not as a promise, but as a possibility I was finally willing to meet. Whatever waited at the end of this road, I knew one thing for certain. We weren't going back the same. We reached the coast the next morning, earlier than planned. The motel window had been cracked open all night, and the sound of waves crept into my dreams until it was the first thing I noticed when I woke up. Theo was already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed, tying his shoes, moving quietly like he didn't want to disturb something fragile. Couldn't sleep? I asked. He glanced back, smiling a little. I slept, just woke up thinking. We didn't talk much as we drove the last short stretch. The ocean stayed beside us, constant and grounding. When we parked, the air was cool and sharp, the kind that clears your head whether you ask it to or not. We walked along the shoreline, shoes in hand, sand damp under our feet. The beach was nearly empty. Just us, a couple of distant figures, and the steady rhythm of water meeting land. Theo stopped first, turned to face me fully, hands in his jacket pockets like he was bracing himself. I don't want to pretend this was just a nice detour, he said. I don't want to go home and shrink it into something safe and forgettable. I felt the weight of that, of him choosing clarity over comfort. Neither do I said. But I also don't want to make promises I don't understand yet. He nodded, relief flickering across his face. That's actually what I was hoping you'd say. We stood there, close enough that I could feel his warmth without touching. For once, I didn't feel the urge to close the gap, just to prove something. Being here, open, honest, felt like enough. So what happens now, he asked. I looked out at the water, then back at him. We go back changed. We don't rush. We don't disappear. We stay curious. A small laugh escaped him. That sounds doable. He reached for my hand, this time without hesitation. I squeezed back, grounding us both. We sat on the sand for a long time after that, shoulders pressed together, watching the tide move in and out. We talked about logistics, cities, jobs, distance, but none of it felt heavy, just real, just part of the shape forming between us. Eventually, the sun climbed higher, the beach growing louder and brighter, life continuing as it always does. As we stood to leave, I felt a quiet certainty settle in, not about outcomes, not about forever, just about this truth. I'd let myself be seen, fully, and I hadn't lost myself in the process. Theo glanced at me as we walked back to the car. You okay? I smiled. Yeah, I am. And it was true. We didn't go home the same. Not because the road changed us, but because we finally stopped protecting ourselves from what we were ready to feel. That kind of honesty stays with you, long after the trip ends.